Okay, so I'm really happy to be here. As Alea mentioned, I spoke at the Women's Day edition, which was that last year or 2 years ago? I lose track of time. Yeah, a lot has happened actually. Like coming back to the Philippines has been really amazing, and I don't really even know where to start with this story. Earlier on, I was arguing with my husband about whether or not I should have slides or not, because when I don't have slides, I tend to randomly talk about things. Sometimes things that should not be mentioned come up. And slides keep me on track, and then I was like, oh, it's cool, it's fine, I'll just... So in case I say stuff that I shouldn't talk about, don't spread it around. So I always have this dilemma when they're like, just talk about your journey, because then I think, where do I start? Which point of the journey? Because in a weird way, like every single part of my life has been relevant to where I've ended up now. And there's a very famous quote by Steve Jobs, right, saying that you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And for much of my life, I was like, oh, philosophical. Didn't really mean anything to me. But suddenly now, I think I'm just in that place in my life right now where I'm like, oh my God, everything makes sense all of a sudden. Everything that I've done in my life, for some weird reason, is relevant to what I'm doing right now. So to give you a little bit of context and to explain why I have this accent, I'm half Filipina. My mom comes from a very small town in Pora, Pampanga. It's actually called Sepong Balaon. So if you know like the McKinney factory that makes the tocino and all that, it's like one town down from that place. There's nothing really there much. But my mom was an OFW, so she went to the UK in like 1972 to be a maid. And that was the only kind of OFW role I think there was, which is another reason why I really relate to the mission of Cuba, that we can actually produce a lot more from the Philippines than just OFWs that go abroad to be domestic workers, right? I'm super, super proud of my mom, by the way, because I believe that domestic workers in those days were the original entrepreneurs. I mean, imagine the amount of courage and risk and sort of tenacity and grit that it took to go and do that job back then. Even now it takes courage, but back then it was crazy to do that. So, I think that with everything that we have available to us in the Philippines, we can actually do a lot more, right? And that's exactly what Cuba is all about. So anyway, my mom went to the UK, she met my dad who was British, and I was one of the few sort of kids that grew up in the UK with my parents because my dad was British. And I grew up with a lot of my mom's friends who had left their kids behind. So I guess that was the first part of like the dots that connected to get me to where I am right now. It didn't really occur to me at the time because all I knew was that I had a lot of titas, and a lot of titas showed me pictures of their kids who were my age, and the kids were in the Philippines, and I was there. And I was kind of like running around playing with my teddy, like pretending my teddy would talk because I didn't have anyone to play with because all the kids were not there. But I guess it was in my mind. And then years later, I moved to Singapore with my husband, and we were there, and we had our own helper for the first time. And our helper, Beth, in the UK, you can't really afford like domestic help unless you're quite wealthy, but in Singapore, it's quite affordable. So anyway, Beth is a widow, and she left her kids behind when they were just tiny. So they were like 2 or 3 years old because her husband had died when she was when they were young. And she hadn't been home for 8 years. And I was kind of shocked, as an adult when I heard that she hadn't been home for 8 years, because I thought, how could this happen? Singapore is like 3 hours away, and this helper has been working to support her kids for this long, and she hasn't even seen her kids for that long. She didn't even have a cell phone. She couldn't even Skype them and stuff like that, which to me was really a horrible realization. And everything came crashing down on me. My parents were domestic workers, and we did come back to the Philippines actually in the late 80s and 90s, because my parents had what I like to call the entrepreneurial seizure. When you're like happily doing your job, and then all of a sudden you have an idea, and the idea just keeps annoying you until all of a sudden you act on the idea, and before you know it, you became an entrepreneur. So this happened to my parents. So they were getting tired of domestic work. They'd just come back from a lovely holiday in the Philippines, where of course when you're like a Filipino who works abroad and comes back, you like splash out all your savings on holiday, you feel like you're rich, and then you go back to like work again and you feel miserable. So anyway, they went back to England and they kind of questioned their life, and they're like, why are we here? Let's just go back to the Philippines and start a business. So we did. So my parents sold up their house, took their life savings, went back to my mom's tiny town, and of all things, decided to start a piggery. They have no experience in pig farming, by the way. I wonder where my entrepreneurial gene came from. So anyway, we ended up with this really cool high-tech piggery because my dad visited all the piggeries in England and like brought back a load of UK technology to this Seven Blown pig farm. And funny enough, like looking back, I realize now that they used to send like groups of students from Magalang, where it's like the agricultural center, to come and look at the stuff that he'd done in his farm because it was so like radical, like ear tagging and like all this special equipment. Anyway. So we had this pig farm, which was unfortunately destroyed in 1991 by Mount Pinatubo, which erupted like 11 miles or something from our house. So my parents lost everything in Mount Pinatubo eruption. And fortunately, we were not in the low part, so we didn't get covered completely with the lahar, but we had enough ash to come down to basically literally flatten the business. So we lost like our whole business. So my parents went back to the UK. My mom went back to domestic work. My dad, well, anyway, it was really traumatic for them. I was kind of young, so I didn't really know. So it was the year before my graduating year when it happened, and I was trying to graduate high school, right? So, and it was really weird because I would go to school. I don't know, is anyone from Pampanga? Right, so Pampanga, like where you were, or the Kapampangans in the house. So we had to cross the river where the lahar, the mud flow would come down. And so because no vehicles would dare cross, they would give us like a payloader, you know, like the payloader thing that scoops sand. So we would just, in our high school uniform, ride in the bucket of the payloader across the river. So one jeep would take you, then you'd ride, and then you'd take the other jeep. Anyway, my dad came back to kind of like wind up the farm and everything. And he said, how are you getting to school? When he realized I was going to school by crossing in this bucket of a payloader, he was really horrified. He wanted me to come back to England. So I ran away. But that's a whole nother story that I probably shouldn't talk about tonight. But anyway, I ran away and lived pretty rough in Angeles City, ran out of money, ended up in some slums, that kind of thing. So I did like weird stuff. But anyway, eventually I went back to the UK, became a stewardess. I know, my life is so weird. The dots actually barely connect. Became a stewardess with British Airways and met my husband who was in IT. So when I met my husband, I'd never even owned a computer. He was building computers in his, like in a local shop in Edgware, which was like a small town in England. And the first time I got a computer was my dad forced me to get one because he had a computer and he could do email and internet. So I'm definitely not a techie. So it's kind of ironic to be like a She Means Tech ambassador because I'm probably like, not that long ago, I was like the least techie person you would ever know. But anyway, you know, all of these things happened, right? All these weird things happened in my life that connected up. And so I was happily being a stewardess. And then we started a small business selling refurbished laptops online. So that's how I got into tech. Because he was like buying laptops and wanted to sell them online, and we started using eBay. So just like here, we have like quite a good boom right now with the buy and sell, right? OLX and all this. We started it with eBay in the UK, which was pretty early. And so that was our first kind of attempt of business. And then we started doing Wi-Fi deployments. When Wi-Fi was really new and nobody had Wi-Fi, we had Wi-Fi in our house and we were like selling it to our neighbors. And then we installed it in my friend's apartment, and then we started selling it to the whole building. And so we were just kind of like dabbling with entrepreneurship. And then it kind of got boring and serious because we got proper clients that we had to service. So we were doing the IT, IT support, that kind of thing, disaster recovery. And in the days when your server would have like a backup thing, and then if it went down, you would have to go get the other backup, or you would have to take the backup home with you, so that if your building burned, the data wouldn't die. I know, all of you are like, what? Most of you. Some of you get it. Anyway, so that's the kind of thing we were doing. And then basically our biggest client headhunted us and moved us to Singapore. So that's how we ended up in Singapore. At this point, I'm like 3 kids in. I haven't really had a proper break because we're doing all this stuff on the side of like raising families, and I was still flying during a lot of the time that we were running the IT company. So I was kind of like flying and working for the IT company that we were running. And then we ended up in Singapore. And so this is where it went full circle. And during the time that we were running our IT company, I got involved in the UK with a women's community called the Athena Network. So it was really a community that was designed to help women start and grow businesses. And we had about 2,500 members in the UK that physically met every month. So we had about 150 events every month. So when I moved to Singapore and they didn't have the Athena Network, I brought it to Singapore because it was such a great, such a great help for me when we were starting up a business and we had no idea how to do invoicing or pay taxes or do any of these things. I guess, in the day there was nothing that I knew of like Kubo. They had something in the UK called Business Link, where you could go and get an advisor and they would tell you how to do bookkeeping and sort of advise you about the basic things, but there wasn't really a lot about startups or anything like that. In fact, we lost big opportunities in Wi-Fi because we didn't have advice like this. Like we had one of the biggest UK development companies that built condominiums wanted us to install Wi-Fi in all of their buildings. It was like a multi-million-dollar or multi-million-pound project, and do you know what happened? We couldn't get the funds to put the equipment in because the bank said, you want to do what? You want to make wireless internet? And I'm not kidding you, the bank manager, we pitched it and we said we already have the order from the St. George PLC that wants us to put this in 200 units initially, and if it works, in all of their buildings. And the bank manager said, I don't get it. I go home, I sit at my computer at my desk, I use my computer at my desk, and then I sit and watch TV and I go to bed. Why would I want wireless internet? Imagine! They wouldn't lend us the money to actually install this innovative technology. Anyway, moving on. You live and learn, right? Sometimes you can be too early and it just all goes wrong. We weren't bitter because we had no idea, actually, at the time. We were so busy playing with the Wi-Fi, we had no idea that we'd actually lost this massive, massive contract. Looking back now, I'm like, wow, that was like a big contract. We could have been millionaires. But I was like, yeah, right. We're not inspired by money. Sadly, we're really inspired by impact. And that's what leads me back to Connected Women now. So, cut a really super long story short, and I'm sure I've gone over time. Sorry, they shouldn't have given me a beer. That's what happens when you give me beer before I talk. I talk a lot anyway, but the beer just makes it worse. I think it all makes sense, right? It's kind of gelling. Okay, kick me if it doesn't make sense.
We love it.
Who's
No, we love it.
Okay, thank you for the encouragement, but don't encourage me too much. So all of this happened, and I'm in Singapore running a women's community, and I think where it kind of, the startup thing came together. Trust me, I never wanted to be a startup. You've got to be crazy and stupid, or both, to want to be a startup. Have you read the articles about startups? Most of them die. Most of them are stressed. Most of them don't achieve their goal. It's a really crazy thing, right, to be a startup. Who would be mad enough? The same way that who would be mad enough to be an OFW in 1972 and fly to London, which my mum thought was in the US. It took her like 3 months before she realized she wasn't in America.
True story.
It really is true.
Yeah.
You've got to be nuts to do it. But then, why do we do it? Why? Why would I ever want to be a startup? We were quite happy with our life. We were like in Singapore, lovely expat contracts going on, kids in international school, everything was going right, and we threw it all away to come back to the Philippines to do a startup. Why? It's because, well, A, entrepreneurial seizure, but B, when you're really passionate about something and you know you can make a difference, and you know that unfortunately, the best model is the startup model. If you want to make a difference and you want to make an impact and you want to make something for yourself, then it's the only option that you have, right? I mean, do I want to help 100 people or 1,000 people or 1 million people? It's a bit of a no-brainer, right? If you can help more women, and if we can stop Filipino women from having to go abroad to be maids when they can actually find potential and opportunity for themselves right back home while staying with their families, then who am I to say no to that? It would be rude not to. So it was kind of like that, actually. Bobby came home from work, everything was going fine. January 2016, I said, so you know that project that I was thinking about doing maybe when we retire? And he was like, what project? And I was like, the thing about going back to the Philippines and helping Filipino women and all that one. It was kind of a vague plan. And he was like, yes. And I was like, well, should we just go and do it? Should we just do it? And he was like, when do you want to go? When do you want to do it? Like that suspicious look. And I was like, should we just go now? And so this was January 2016, and by April we were here. 3 kids, dog, 5 balik-bayan boxes, moved back into his family home in Sucat, Paranaque. That was an experience. With a loose but kind of good plan, and that's how it happened. So it really has been a journey, but I think that, I really share the sentiment of Kath and the Kubo team and all of those that are trying to elevate startups in the Philippines, because the thing is this is the only way that we can create a catalyst to get ourselves out of all of the trouble that we have here, right? All of the problems, all of the struggles. We have everything. All the opportunity is here. Have you ever seen the word when you have opportunity is nowhere, and then you cram the 2 words together? And it's you can read it 2 ways. It either says opportunity is nowhere or opportunity is now here. And that's what I feel about Philippines, right? For all these years, opportunity was nowhere, and now opportunity is now here. So, I have absolutely no regrets about coming back. I love the traffic. I sit in the back of the Grab, working away in peace, in air conditioning, without my kids nor my dog bugging me. And the internet connectivity is not that bad. I honestly don't find it that bad. Sometimes it's a bit jippy, but it doesn't stop me from doing what I need to do. And it's pretty much everywhere that I need to be, thankfully. Let's make sure we get it everywhere so that everyone can benefit from this, because it's ridiculous that people can't connect yet, right? So this is part of Connected Women's passion, is helping women work with women everywhere. At the moment, we're focusing on Filipino women, to help Filipino women work with women everywhere. But there's no reason why Filipino women entrepreneurs can't hire UK, British service providers, right? Or US service providers in the future. So that's our vision, really, is to empower women through connection, and to try and be a startup against our will and succeed. And you know what? We don't care if we fail. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to be in a startup, you're going to be in it for the journey. Well, I don't really want to fail. I want to succeed, obviously. I want to be that one that Butch was talking about earlier. But you've got to be in it for the journey. Because if you're not in it for the journey, you're just going to be in it for pain. So, and a failure is not the end of the world. I've seen so many failures and disasters in my life. So, thank you so much to Kubo for having me here. Oh my God, sorry, I'm so over time. You should have just kicked me off. I'm used to that. And I thought I was going to be second, so I was unprepared. Thank you.
That's all.
Thank you. That's unprepared.